This is AgGrad Live.
We have all of the different segments within the cotton.
The show that explores what it's really like to work in the ag industry.
So making sure that we get policy and regulatory issues
straight from the people who live it every day. AgGrad Nation, we are back for the second week in a row of the new format of AgGrad Live. As I've said last week, in case you missed it, we have shifted a little bit, going from looking at career discovery of like, hey, what jobs are out there in agriculture, to how can we improve ourselves no matter what career you're in? What advice would be helpful for you to kind of take your career to the next level? I was looking today, I can't believe we've done, I think, 30 or so of these. If you missed some of the early ones and you want to go back and watch, you can do so in two different ways. You can check out our YouTube channel, which is just AgGrad on YouTube, or you can subscribe to the AgGrad Live podcast. If you're a podcast listener, you can find that iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, all of the podcast things you can find AgGrad Live. So we are going to continue to release them on all three platforms, on Facebook, on YouTube, and the podcast. So I am especially excited for our guest today because she is a good friend of mine, somebody I get to interact with on a regular basis. I can remember it was just, maybe 3 years ago, her and I reconnected after a long time in Austin when she was there to pitch her new company at the time, the Poultry Exchange. Please welcome to the show, Janette Barnard. Janette, you are on AgGrad Live.
Awesome. Good to be here, Tim.
Well, I am excited about this because you are now with DecisionX as a sales and marketing director, a company that deals with risk management through software. And we are here to talk about taking risks in your career. But maybe before we start diving into it too deep, just tell everybody kind of what you do and what DecisionNext is all about.
Yeah, so I lead sales and marketing for DecisionNext. So like you said, we're a software company. We're really focused around predictive analytics for commodities industries. So think like beef, pork, poultry, grain, copper, thermal coal, any segment where there's a commodity market. And so players are making decisions either about buying or selling a product that's somehow tied to that market. So we're working with large companies across those segments to implement our software solutions. So in terms of leading sales and marketing, I get to work on building the team and building out our approach of how we go to market. So as still a relatively young venture, DecisionNext is, that creates just a lot of really fun opportunities to be a part of a growing company like this.
Awesome. And I just want to get right into it because I know some people are like checking this out, want to know why should I watch the rest of this video? You mentor a lot of people I know and give some great advice on LinkedIn. As you're talking to people maybe early in their career, what are the top things that come to mind as far as advice that you give them?
Yeah, so I think that I would break it down into two buckets. So one is about people and about how you are interacting and building your network. And I'm sure we'll talk about this more later, but network kind of has such a hygienic feel to it. It's really about people, and it's about the relationships that you're building and doing that on purpose and very intentionally and just with a high degree of awareness and purpose within that. And then the second thing is about trajectory and making decisions that are going to shift your career trajectory. And I think for me, I've kind of lucked into decisions that really impacted my career trajectory. I wish I could say that they had been on purpose, but I kind of lucked my way into some trajectory shifting opportunities. But tends to be my biggest advice to people who are just starting out is around making decisions that are going to impact where you end up in 30 years, not just where you're going to end up in 1 year or 2 years.
Yeah. So that long-term thinking, but I do think you're being a little modest when you say you just lucked into it. I mean, you did take some risks. Like I know, for example, you left a very promising career to go get your MBA. There are others in this community, the AgGrad community, that have considered doing the same. Talk through a decision like that. How do you look at that? That's not luck. You had two great options and you had to make the choice, one or the other. How'd you approach that decision?
Yeah, no, great point. And I'll just say it right up front, that was a really hard decision, even though I had always wanted to get an MBA. So I had been with Elanco for about 4.5 years. I was in a strategic account manager role, lots of really great learning and people around me. And then I had applied to business school and got accepted. And so when it push came to shove to make the decision, really the thing for me was, I think I kind of had, maybe at that point, I did have that trajectory in mind. And I knew that I could learn what I wanted to learn staying in the role I was in. It was just going to take me longer. And that's what I saw as by going to business school, I could cram more learning into a shorter period of time and come out on the other end just much more confident about how companies make money, how money moves throughout, capital markets, and what impact that has on businesses' strategic decisions. I was starting to be aware at that time that I had an interest in entrepreneurship. It wasn't fully fledged, but I just kind of had an inkling that the MBA path could be a path to going further to explore that entrepreneurship interest I had. And thankfully I did, because it was while I was in business school, that was when I realized, oh my goodness, this entrepreneurship thing is really cool. And just kind of a lot of things coincided at that time. Once I had made the jump from Elanco and I wasn't dependent upon a consistent salary, which, I mean, that's a pretty addicting drug, right? A consistent paycheck. Mm-hmm. So once I had kind of made that leap, then it made it easier to, as I was looking at what was going to happen post business school, it made it easier to just be more objective about my options and about, what is it that I'm really trying to accomplish? Where do I really want to be versus, what are the short-term options, and how can I sequence, how do I sequence things to get where I'm trying to go from both a learning standpoint as well as hey, there's harsh realities of you got to be able to pay the rent, right? So, right. So just kind of allowed for that sequence of events there.
Right on. And you've worked now for a very large company, your own startup, from scratch, and now a later stage startup. Mm-hmm. What would you tell people about, taking a risk of either working for a large company, which has, its own risks, versus working for maybe a startup company? Is there one person that's right for one and not for the other? How do you look at that?
It's a good question. I don't think I don't think it's right that, people are just right for one or the other. I think it's all about like how you approach it. Right. So, I guess I just would say for me, I love working with big companies. They have so much resources. A lot of times those companies are just filled with really talented people. That said, and hopefully any future potential employers aren't going to hear me say this, but I probably don't want to work for a large company, right? Like not right now. That's just not the phase I'm in. The phase I'm in right now is I want to take risk. I want to be a part of high growth. That's what I'm seeking. And so that being said, though, my customer base is those exact large companies, similar to the ones that I used to work for. So I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's just all about like finding your niche in the ecosystem and stopping to assess what attributes of a company, what attributes of a work environment, what attributes of a specific role do I want to have. And for me, it's all about where can I have the highest runway from a growth perspective. It just so happens that kind of correlates with where the risk is also. I've talked to some candidates in trying to recruit some folks, both at the Poultry Exchange as well as at DecisionNext, and they have a lot of questions about, well, what am I going to do? What if the company doesn't work out? And, I took this risk, and then what am I going to do? And I think it's just all about trying to understand what are the actual risks you're facing. What's really asking yourself, what's the actual worst case scenario that could happen here? Is it that the company goes under? Is it that you get laid off? Is it that you get fired? Like, what is the actual worst case scenario? And what's your plan from there? And I think when people, instead of just imagining the demons that are out there, if they can really vocalize and put words to the worst case scenario is X. And if X happens, my next move is Y. And these are the three people I'm going to pick up the phone and call. And when I tell them, here's why I went to that company, and here's what I was looking to get from it, and here's how I'm able to contribute more as a result of that experience. Well, now that worst case scenario is actually an advantage to you. So I guess that's what I mean when I think about taking smart risk, is just always asking yourself, what's the worst case scenario? And I think the other thing is always having an exit plan, right? And just that idea of, if my worst case scenario happens, who are the three people I'm going to call? Who are the three jobs I'm going to, what are the 3 jobs I would apply for? What are the 3 things I would do? And just having that in your mind. And I think having that backup plan in place allows you to take risks that otherwise might feel a little bit too risky. And more importantly, I think it allows you to show up every day, whether you work at a large company or a startup or anything in between, but it allows you to show up every day knowing that I'm choosing to be here. I'm not here because I can't get something somewhere else. And I think that's really important. So
okay, so everybody, if you didn't listen to that, either rewind or if you're watching live, come back and watch it later, because right there, I think that is a huge nugget. If you could figure this out, you can understand risks. I talk to a lot of people that have a very warped view of risk, but if you can do exactly what Janette just said, play through the worst case scenario in your head, then play through your plan when that worst case scenario hits. Once you know that, I mean, what do you have to worry about? Then you can really look at it objectively on, okay, where do I stand to gain the most from the situation? I think that is fantastic. I also, Janette, want to get into networking because I know firsthand you are very, very skilled when it comes to networking. And networking is something that no matter if you're in sales and marketing like you are, or even if you're in a less customer facing role, it's extremely important for one in their career. So help those that maybe aren't natural networkers understand kind of the importance and what you mean when you say networking on purpose.
Yeah. So I think that you use the phrase natural networkers. I do think that there are people that maybe this comes a little bit more instinctively to. However, I absolutely believe that networking is a skill, right? And so like all other skills and behaviors, it can be learned, right? So I guess I would just trace my experience back to when I was an FFA officer. And people were always giving us business cards and saying, call when we can help. And at the time, I'm 19, 20 years old, and I don't really know what to do with the business card. I don't know what I would say to them if I emailed them. I don't know what I would ask for help with. But thankfully, I kept some of those. And in the months right after that year was over, I reached out to a few people, the ones that were the most interesting to me, that seemed they worked for the most interesting companies, or they seemed the most genuine when they handed me their business card, whatever it was. Reached out to them. And there was one, so Cargill was a company where I had a few connections into, and reached out to someone. They said, hey, let's talk about internship opportunities. Great. That's a topic I'm interested in at the age of 20. So that led to an internship in Nicaragua. So I come back from Nicaragua. I ended up going to work for Elanco Animal Health, but still stayed connected with some people. And then some people that had turned into mentors through that time. So I'm working at Elanco, but I'm calling some of those Cargill friends to, hey, I'm running into this scenario with my boss. How do I handle it? Or I'm running into this scenario with my customers. How do I handle it? Just getting outside opinion, right? So then I leave to go to business school, and I know that I'm going to have a summer for an internship while I'm at business school. And I know that I want something a little bit closer to the consumer, but I'm not quite sure what that is. So I tapped one of those Cargill connections and said, hey, any ideas here? They said, yes. We, by the way, have a division that works just with McDonald's, obviously really close to the consumer there, and connected me. And a few connections later, they kind of passed me around, got the internship with them, spent the summer working with some incredible people in McDonald's global supply chain team, and Cargill's beef division. And then fast forward, some of those relationships continued to grow, continued to evolve into more mentor type relationships. And then kind of simultaneously, as I was shutting the poultry exchange down, someone that I had connected with through another vein had gotten me, they were actually the ones that connected me with DecisionNext and said, hey, you're looking to stay in startups and the ag space. They're looking for some sales team help. And so they had connected us. And then the long story long here is that my first customer that I closed with DecisionNext actually traces back to that whole sequence of people that I had met through FFA and through Cargill that I'd stayed connected with. And so I say that in that I think this networking on purpose thing, it's really about building relationships with people, and it's about understanding people's experiences so you can learn from them. It's about understanding how can you help them. So I hope that I've I've hoped people have stories similar about how I've added value to them and connected them with jobs or potential customers or whatever the case is. But I think it's just being very purposeful about building those relationships, and you never, ever, ever, ever know where a future really valuable connection is going to come from. So whether that's with a recruiter like you, Tim, or with a customer that says, I don't want your product now, but let's stay in touch. And maybe in 3 years they do want your product, and maybe you're with a different company. Who knows? So I think you just never know where there's going to come from. But I guess just kind of drilling, that's all a little bit philosophical maybe, but drilling down into just the specific skill of it. I think if you're, in college or fairly new into your career, if I were you, I would just set a goal of, I'm going to spend an hour a month on LinkedIn. I'm going to send 3 messages every month to someone, to people that are in my network that I haven't talked to in a while, and just say, hey, what are you working on that's interesting and new these days? See what they say. And then maybe I'm going to send a cold message to 3 people on LinkedIn that I think look really interesting. And I would, if I had a 20-minute phone call with them, I could really learn from them or pick their brain and just see what you get. And you have to be smart about how you craft that message so that it is personal and genuine. But I think if you do that consistently, of reaching out to people in your network to really foster the relationship and reaching out to new people, I think you'll see the dividends of that over time. And maybe it's, an hour a month on LinkedIn, and I'm going to go to coffee with 1 new person every month. Something like that. And I don't know what's right for everyone, but I think setting specific targets like that really help you, especially if you're not inclined to do that anyway. Kind of having that scorecard approach to it can be helpful, especially from like the early days standpoint.
Yeah, and for you, what was that time horizon between like the internship and then when you actually got this first sale with DecisionX? Like how long was that time period?
Yeah, so 10 years. Okay, actually 11 years.
People aren't thinking that far in advance. And I think that gets back to your earlier point about like, hey, play the long game. Personal development is the long game. Relationships is the long game. Like really making strategic decisions about where you ultimately want to end up. And I think that's such a great example of that. And especially when it comes to relationships. I think that is really awesome. You also mentioned kind of like, developing relationships. And I know, you mentioned a recruiter. For me, I just had the experience like this week where we were about to have a phone call and get to know each other. That's always the first step when I work with a candidate. They shot me a message 10 minutes before. It said, got a job, thanks, and canceled the meeting. And it's like, boy, I wasn't after just the transaction of getting you a job this time. I was after the relationship, and maybe I will help you find a job this time. Maybe I will 5 years down the road, but why close the door now? And I think that's something that not enough people think about, the long game relationally that way.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Similar story is that I had reached out to someone about 6 months ago that I thought would be a really great candidate for a role that I'm hiring for, a sales role. And I knew this person had been at the company they were with for about 5 years, and I knew they were really doing well. But I thought, there's always a conversation, you never know when someone's looking for the next opportunity. Right. And so anyway, I'd reached out to this person, and they blew me off a couple of times, as in like we set a time and they didn't make it to the call. And then I finally just was like, hey, it seems like you're pretty happy where you are. And so let's not try to reschedule. But it was really interesting because I think people who are trying to always broaden their horizons, that even if you're not going to make a jump right now and you're not interested in a job, always have the conversation, always take the phone call, because you never know, again, you never know where it's going to lead. And maybe today's not the day, but maybe in 3 years is the day. And at least you've been smart about building the relationship. But I think just that idea of always being open to the conversation is pivotal. And let's be honest, sometimes those conversations are a waste. Sometimes they are, and that's okay. It's you have the 10 conversations so that you have the one that turns into a valuable relationship. That's
absolutely true. And it gets back to what you said earlier. So like, let's say you're not the type that likes networking, and you force yourself to say, okay, I want to do this thing where Janette talked about in sending a LinkedIn message to 3 people. Mm-hmm. Okay, you're not going to want to do it because it's not your natural, but back to what Janette was saying earlier, think through, okay, the worst thing they're going to say is no. Maybe even worse than that, they're going to think, oh, wow, who does this person think they are reaching out to me? Yeah. Okay, how does that play out? Really, you're no worse off. And so I think it's just all of your advice is kind of coming together. at least in my mind. So this is meshing well, very well. Well,
Awesome.
I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know you're in San Francisco today, and I would rather be out in the beautiful San Francisco weather than cooped up talking to us. But before we let you go, I would just love to hear kind of about how can the AgGrad community kind of support you and help you in DecisionNext and the type of stuff you're doing right now?
Yeah. Oh, so love that question. That's the kind of question that someone who networks on purpose asks. Yeah. So actually, right now we're hiring. So we're hiring for sales roles. We're looking for, fresh college grads to come in and be business development reps on our team. We are looking for account executives. So folks that have, let's say 3 to 7 years of industry experience to come in and join our team. So we are actively hiring. If you or someone is interested in one of those roles, that would be awesome. Or, hey, if you're working at a company that's in one of those commodity spaces and you're on a buying or a pricing or a sales team, we'd love to have a conversation and understand, how your team works and what you do. And if there's, some way that predictive analytics can help you guys. So at a high level, I guess that's what I would say. Thanks for asking that, Tim.
Yeah, perfect. No, this has been great, Janette. I think there's some really, really, really valuable advice that I wish I had years ago. I think I would have done some things better, but I really appreciate you being on the show. I appreciate all this, and make sure you come back in the comments, put your contact information so people can reach out to you. I don't have that queued up to put on the screen. But yeah, those of you who are interested in any of the stuff Janette talked about, she'll put a comment under this video of how you can reach out to her. And then also you can always go to jobs.aggrad.com and create a profile there to be kept up to date about other exciting opportunities like this. So thank you again, Janette.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you for joining AgGrad Live. Visit aggrad.com, that's AGGRAD, to join the community, create your profile, and learn more about careers in the agriculture industry.